Clem 4 Authentication Lesson 20. Flashing validation errors via the session on the front end. So here's what we want to do. We're going to do two things in this lesson. First, we want to clean up the look of these validation errors. We want it to look good. Secondly, we only want to flash the errors when a form fails. We don't want to keep it in the session for multiple requests. We want it to be in the session for the very next request, and then we want the session to forget about it. This is called flashing to the session. We're flashing for a single request. It's a quick flash to the session, and then the information disappears. So we want to flash this data, this failed validation messages, and then we also want to make them look good. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to actually install this npm package. And this is going to be Vue and then material. One sec. It's going to be Vue, material design icons, my bad. Material design icons. All right. Now, we'll let that install and we'll actually get to that part later. Where we're actually going to start today is we're going to go to our providers. And we're going to go, sorry, not providers, to our session. And we're going to add a flash method. And so we're going to say public function flash. And we're going to say key equals false and value equals false. After that, what we want to do is we want to say, okay, if there is no key and there is no value, we just want to return the flashback. So if there is no key and no value, then return this get flashback. If there is a key and no value, or no ISIT value, then we want to do return data get, this get flashback, and then all. And then we're going to pass it the key. So we're going to get all of the items from the flashback, and then we're going to get the path to whatever we want using data get. Final thing is if key and ISIT value, or is set value, return this get flashback, and then add key value. And add and set, be careful with these two. These get really confusing. So just notice we're using add right here. All right, so after that, what we want to do is we want to go back to our login controller. And within our login controller, we want to do two things. First, we want to import the support class for array, and we want to collapse the array based on the array values we get from the validator errors messages. All right, so this is going to be messages. And that's just going to be collapse the array and get the array messages. All of the validation messages, they already name the field that fails in the string. Like if it's the field, when it fails, it will say this field failed with string. We just want to be able to iterate through a flat array. We don't need the key for just displaying a list of errors. After that, we're going to say session flash, and then we're going to set errors as messages. All right. Then we're simply going to go to login.play.php. We're going to scroll up to the top, and then we're simply going to say, let's get the session, and it's going to be flash errors. And so what we're doing is we're flashing the session errors. We don't need to persist them in the session, right? So we're just going to flash them one time. That's all. So after that, we are going to go and test this out. Okay, so that's going to be null. So now, that's still going to be null. So here's what we need to do. We need to actually do session, and this is going to be flash. We're not going to pass anything in. We're going to say get errors. There we go. Will fail is a required field, password is a required field, and false. I'm not sure what that false is. So, if we go to login controller, let's try. Honestly, I'm not sure what that false is right there, but we'll figure it out as we go. All right, so after that, here's what we want to do. We want to first ask ourselves, do we have any errors to show? And then if we do have errors to show, then we want to show them. So we're going to say, if the flash session has errors, then endif. Then if we have errors, we want to say for each session flash get errors as message, and we simply want to do at end for each, and then we want to do message. And obviously we're going to want to clean this up too, but let's make sure this works first. All right, so that is properly working and looping through. So next what we want to do is we want to refactor this, and we want to just include an errors section. So we'll do sections.errors. After that, we'll go to sections, and we'll add a new errors.blade.php template. Right in there, we'll do the same logic. Then we'll go back and confirm that is also still working. All right, still good to go. So now that we have that set up, let's clean it up. And I'm not going to make you guys watch me type this out. Instead, we're going to go to the authorized Slim 4 GitHub repo. And we're going to go to the experimental sessions branch. So that is going to be right here, experimental session. Then we're going to go resources, JS, and then we're going to go, nope, not JS, my bad, views, sections, and then errors.blade.php. We're just going to copy that over and just overwrite this. And then we're also going to remove this and remove this. We don't have that set up yet. We'll get that set up here in a sec. All right, so now let's try that again and let's see how this looks. There we go. Okay, so next we want to get icons set up. And so that package we installed earlier, we actually installed it wrong. So it's going to be save dev and the material design icons, and not dev, it's just going to be npm install save material design icons. Okay. Whoop. npm no run. I don't know why I keep doing that today. So npm install -- save material design icons. While that's installing, we're going to go over here and we're going to add these two scripts. The first is going to be a new material icons file. We're going to add that right in our root. After that, we're actually going to import the CSS within our main.js. these are both from the library we are currently installing. So this material icons is going to be a funky file. Don't really need to know how it works. It's more important to understand what it does. And what it does is it simply imports all of the components, all of the Vue components from that material design icons library. So it just imports like 1,000 or so different icons we're able to use by just referencing an HTML tag via Vue instead of having to actually remember everything. So all we're going to do is we're going to go to Authorize_Slim4, the GitHub, again, experimental session branch, resources.js, and then material icon.js. Copy this, and then once we copy this, we're going to save that. Then we'll pull this up, and now we'll do npm run watch. Now once that is installed, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to say circle, and notice how all of these are popping up. This is why I like inputting the library and components like that. Whenever we want to add icons now, you can just start typing Vue, and if you have the right extensions in your IDE, then it will show you. So we'll do alert circle icon. We'll do that, and then once that is done compiling, and we actually need to go right in here, and then we want to wrap this in a div because the container above it is a flexbox, and we're just going to say margin left, and we'll go 4. Alright, and then we'll close that div off, and we'll go back to our browser. Now it takes a sec to compile now because we are importing a lot of components, but I'm not too concerned about the speed at this point. Alright, and we are done compiling. So let's go back to our browser and let's do Command-Shift-R, a hard reload. So a lot of times right after you compile npm, you want to do a hard reload. I don't know why, but it can be really weird sometimes if you don't. But there we go. So there's our icons. Now let's go back to our login controller and let's clean things up a bit. So the first thing I want to do is I want to refactor this a bit. This is kind of ugly, and we're going to have to use this in the register controller as well as any other forms we have. So what if we did something like this? What if we did session validate, and then we did input all, and then we did rules, just like that. We'll get rid of that, and we'll fail. Don't need that anymore. Alright, and then we just say validator equals session validate, and then we do if validator fails, return back. Then, and this isn't the best coding practice or design, but I'm not, like, I like to use it when it's useful, and this seems useful. So we're going to copy this part down here, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to go back to our session.php class, and this is what we're going to add. It's going to be input rules messages. We're going to create the validator here. If the validator fails, we're just going to add the flash error messages here, and then we'll return the validator. And so what we're doing is we're saying session validate, and was that validator? It's validator. So session validator, then we're going to do input all, and then we set our rules. If we want to add any custom messages, we of course can do that there. And then we can just do if the validator fails, return back. And then we're already just automatically setting our session errors. So let's confirm that this works properly. Oh boy, I think I messed up. Okay, so let's go back to login, and let's go here. Yeah, there we go. So it's still working properly. The next thing I want to show you guys, and I've been kind of tinkering a little bit behind the scenes, but we have this database connection default not configured. So let's do this. First, let's set up our register controller to properly validate. And we're going to say, if not successful, return back, and then we'll do session flash set errors to login failed. So if the login fails, we'll also flash that, and we'll return back, and we can move this down here, and then we can do return redirect. All right. And then we just need to flip this and say, if the attempt, so this will return true if the attempt succeeds. So if it doesn't succeed, we want to flash the login form. Let's clean this one up a bit. And this has a few more interesting problems than our login controller. So the first one is we're going to want to do session and then validator. And we're going to say input all, and then we're going to add our rules. So there's a really important rule here that we want to add. That's going to be email, and then we want to say unique, and then so it's going to be unique, and then user's email. So what is this doing? Well, check this out. And this is where we can find all the validation rules too. If we go to Laravel validators, and that's what we're using, then we can get a list of all of the validation rules. So if we go validation rules, here's all of our rules. And one of these rules, and again, this is just validation, available validation rules, official Laravel docs, great documentation. But here's one of the big ones. And there's a few like this that depend on the database, but unique. So here's what we're doing. Unique, and then you can either reference the model path, or you can reference the table, and then which table you need to be unique. So like on the app user, on the user's table, the email address needs to be unique. So the big important thing with this is we need a database connection. And because we're outside of Laravel, this gets really funky, but we got to figure it out. So here's how this is going to work. We're going to do session validator. We're going to do validate or validator. We're going to do if validator fails, then we're going to say return back, just like that. And we don't really need the indentations on that one. But then we can also do this. We can do password, and password is going to be same as confirm password, and then we're going to say min of 5, and then we're going to go down here, we're going to say confirm password, and then we're going to say min of 5. Right there. And then the other one we're going to want to do is required with confirm password. Required with confirm password, same as confirm password, and a minimum of 5. And this is just going to be string and required. All right. After that, we'll add our validation rules. And so this is going to replace this, and the email is actually going to replace this. All right, so then for the validation, what we want to do is we want to do same, and it's going to be password.same. And we're going to say attribute does not match same. So this is saying attribute does not match confirm password. After that, we're going to say password dot required with, we're going to say attribute needs, and then we'll say required with to properly validate. And then we'll say email, and we'll say attribute is not unique or already exists. All right, and then after that, and then this also needs to be an email, and it is required. And we're going to say email.unique. We're going to say email.email is going to be attribute must be an email, and then email.required is attribute is required. Okay, and so then we have confirm password dot required equals attribute is required, and then confirm password dot string, and that will say attribute must be a string. All right, so those are our rules along with the validation errors if they fail, or messages if they fail. So that's our validator, and we were able to remove a couple things by doing that. So here's what we need to do next. We need to actually set up the ability for our validator to access our database. And so to do that, we have to go back to our HTTP validator factory. We are going to have to add something pretty fancy. And actually, this is going to be the validator service provider, not factory. I don't know what I was thinking. My bad, guys. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to bind this and then database presence verification interface class. Then we're going to say function database capsule, and that's going to be a new database presence verifier capsule get database manager. Database presence verifier, database presence, and we'll do database presence verifier. There we go. Okay, so that's our database presence verifier. Sounds really fancy. That's because it is. This took me a while to figure out, I'm going to be honest, but it's really helpful for confirming a lot of things on validation that are normally difficult, that Laravel validators make easy. So then after that, we're going to say validator factory, and then we're going to make this a function. And we're going to close that out. We're going to say function, and then we're going to return this. That's going to be new validator factory, and do that. Okay. So first we need to get all of our database connections from our config. So we're going to say database.connections. After that, we're going to get our default database connection, again defined in our config. That's going to be database.default. Then we're going to say capsule add connection. We're going to say data get connections, and then default connection, and then we're going to pass in default. Next, we need to actually use our capsule. So to do that, we can just do db capsule, because we already bind our database capsule to the container in our database service provider. All right, so after that, we need to actually resolve this thing that we bind right above. And so to do that, we need to do database presence verifier interface presence verifier. Okay, so knock that down, knock that down. Just like that, just like that. Okay, so now we have our capsule, and we add our default connection. After that, we need to say validator is our new validator. That's going to equal our new validator. But after we set our validator or instantiate it, we need to set our presence verifier. And this is going to be the presence verifier. This basically gives the validation information about our database connection, so we can use it to implement certain validation rules that require access to the database. All right, so after we have that set up, we need to go over to, it's going to be database and then service provider. And then sometimes this will be called without a validator, so we need to set up our config database connections.mysql, or we can just say connections equals config database connections, and then default It's going to be config database.default. And then after that, we're going to say add connection. We're going to do data get connections. And then we want to get the default connection. All right. So with all of that set up, we should be able to go back. Database connection default not configured. We should have just configured that. So if we try to submit this, there we go. Email is required. So if we fill in an email that already exists, we should get email is not unique, an error similar to that. There we go. And so now we have validation rules or messages, validation rules that can check against our database, and every single rule on this Laravel setup. Where's that list? So now all of these validation rules will properly work. So whenever you add a validator, we can use any one of these rules. There's great, phenomenal documentation on these. You can also add your own rules, and it explains that at the bottom. It's just a callback function or a class. But yeah, as far as I know, every single one of these should be working. And the big two that were the hardest to get but are really important are only allow this to pass validation if a thing with this value already exists in the database, or unique, which is saying the exact opposite. Only allow this thing to pass validation if this same value does not already exist in the database. It has to be unique, or it has to already exist. And those need access to the database. The date ones might be the only ones that are weird. The ones with date, like right there. But we might get into that later on. So, with all of that set up, if we go back to our register controller, we have this. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to forget confirm password. We want to forget the CSRF value. And we want to forget this CSRF name. And the reason we have to forget all of this stuff is because to create a user, due to the fact that within the user model, password is guarded. So within register controller, when we create a user, we have to force create them. And that means that we'll try to save these values and pass them to MySQL. And we can't do that because MySQL will throw an error. So we have to remove these values, but it's only because we're trying to force create. So yeah, then what we can do is we can do return. We're going to do auth. And then we'll just do return auth attempt. That's going to be true or false, but it will also log in the user if it is true. And if it is true, we want to redirect them to home. But if it is false, we want to redirect them back to where they came from. So, with all of that said and done, with any luck, this should properly allow us to register a new user. So let's do Sammy Python. Sammy.p at python.org, secret, and register. Home dashboard, welcome Sammy P. So there we go, guys. That is the validation in a nutshell. And then if we go back and we log out and we try to re-register again using Sammy P, then we do sammy.p at python.org, secret, email already exists. So our validation is set up and good to go. Simple